Do you have a friend who always wants to tell you their dreams until you become quite the expert in them? They're your friend, but you want to charge them by the hour. Well, I do. Always, very early on when we haven't seen each other, I get a little resume of his dreams. So I suppose I've become quite the expert in them, in one way or t'other. But there was always a dream. I've known this friend 15 years or more, and the dream was old by the time I met him. That kept on coming back. In that dream, my friend said, I was invited to some great house, all a long facade, 3 stories high. But on the left end there was a tower, an old tower, 4 square, high battlements. Pebble dash, but a lot older than the rest of the buildings. That kind of flint work they used to use in the middle of the Middle Ages, with little windows, while all the rest is Georgian splendour. And I would always be invited in, or feel I was invited in. And the first time I had the dream, I was at a garden party. A beautiful sunlit lawn. And as I went into that garden, that's when my heart missed a beat for the very first time. And I would sit there and I had sandwiches with the family. And do you know the strange thing? Nobody said anything. I mean anything at all. Their faces were all sombre and sad and long. And they looked at me. When I first had the dream, it was a wife who I knew, without being told, was Mrs. White. Her youngest son, who would have been at that point 10 years old. And various members of the family, originally 2 daughters and another son. And I took that first time cucumber sandwiches with them, then on the lawn under a mighty birch tree. And the second time I shivered was when I looked, and at the end of the garden there was a gate. A railing gate. And beyond it, a meadow. And I don't know why it made me shiver, but I did. And then at the end of the tea party, for that was what it was, Mrs. White spoke. And this was the first time in the dream I remember anyone saying anything. John will show you to your room. We've put you at the top of the tower, as normal. And although I feel I would have wanted otherwise, even from that first time, the young son took me by the hand and led me into the house and up the tower, and we went up stage upon stage until we came to the 4th floor. And there was a mighty oak door, and he opened the door and I went inside, and it was dark, and he closed the door behind me. And then I always wake up in blind terror, screaming, although I cannot remember what it was. I can never remember what it was. That was so terrifying in my dream. And he had that dream again and again. Once a month, it seemed. Yes, and sometimes the details change. I mean, one time we were in the smoking room. A horrible dark room it was. And I was smoking a large cigar that I hated. I think I was drinking some port, and I was sitting silently with 2 of the sons until the hated voice rang out, John will show you to your room. And her youngest son materialised, and up I went. Another time we were playing cards. We often used to do that if it was an evening, or winter's evening. We played a strange game. Nobody ever said anything. It was a pack of cards, all black. There were no reds. And then there were those horrible cards, which seemed to have no design. They were just black and meant something I knew terrible. And what the game was, I cannot remember. All I remembered was I hated playing it. And at the end, once again, Mrs. White always said, "John will show you to your room." And as the months and years passed, I got to know the house quite well. One time, for reasons I'm never sure, we ate in the kitchen. Another time, we sat in the hall together and talked and drank coffee, although nobody spoke. In this silent house, with its one phrase, to talk was just to sit still and to look, and to go through the motions of talking. "Did the dream ever change?" I once asked. And he said, "Oh yes." That was, I think, the strangest part of it. The characters have aged as I have aged, in real time. John is now older, nearer to 20. One of the daughters, I think, must have married and left home. Occasionally she turns up with some unfortunate man who sits in silence with her. The son, I know by rumour, had been sent abroad. Although I don't know, I know why. And I don't know how I was told. But Mrs. White looked particularly sour that day, as if the scandal had been great. And she changed. When I first met her, does one meet anyone in dreams? When you can't talk to them? I don't know. When I first met her, she had black hair and could move easily around the house. I saw her walk and come up to me close when she said the words once or twice. I felt her cold breath, shivered as I felt it. But gradually, as the years passed, she grew older, wizened, stopped being able to walk at all. Looked at me with dark eyes. And then there was a strange pause. I noticed he didn't tell me of the dream for 6 months. Not once. Oh, I heard about everything else that happened. Long enough for me to go curious. And I asked him. And he looked at me and he said, I hope I've left it. The terror of that black room. Somehow over the years, it's got worse, you know. Worse, Julius. Not better. Worse. And then that very night, he must have had it. For he hung me up the next day and said, "He was curious, we talked about it last night." I had the dream again. And this time we were back in the main room, the lounge. But Mrs. White was not there. And from the colours of mourning, I knew she was recently dead. Recently dead, I tell you. And so I laughed and joked. I felt as if somehow the taboo had been lifted. And in my dream, I made jokes, while all the faces around me grew longer, grew sadder, grew horrified at my humour. It looks at me sourly. And at the end, when I was thinking, at least I'll be able to go, I won't hear that words again. Again the words came. "John will show you to your room." Words that had no soul in them, no tongue. But once again, John, who is now 25, took me by the hand. Still. But now his hand was like a cold vice. I couldn't have escaped if I wanted, as he led me up the dark passages to the room. And once again I woke in horror. This is interesting. It will be interesting to see how the dream developed. And it developed in one way only. It was the next time my friend was in the garden once again. And I looked out the gate onto the meadow. You know, the meadow that I'd always looked in fear on. And I realised in the dream that I must be fearful of it, because the tower, my own window, looked out upon that meadow. So something of the fear of the one had gone into the fear of the other, but which way round I did not know. So I looked then through the gate, and there I saw it. A gravestone. Mrs. White, born Daphne. May she rest. May she rest unquietly. May she rest unquietly in her evil. And I read it like that, piece by piece. And as that word evil came, the hated voice rang. John will show you to your room. And up I went. And again, this time when I screamed, my heart, I thought it was explode with fear. And so the times passed. Him and I, we had many joint friends. I remember there was one, John Savage. Now John Savage was a successful author, it happens, who had taken a house in the country. A fine house. I remember he invited me down. It was a summer's day. And I looked at the house and I thought to myself, my. It is like my friend's dream. Perhaps all is not fantasy after all. Now I felt safe, for I knew my friend was in Scotland fly fishing. And I stayed a month there, perfectly happily. The only thing that was weird was the dog seemed to hate the railing, gate, look out, and it was a brave dog. And yet it would look out and bark, gripped between fear and hatred at something that it saw there. I drew it once, and I showed it in London to a friend, and the friend said that they had never seen such a look on a dog. Well, sometimes Darius the cat would go to that same spot and sit and purr as if something was stroking him. Darius was not a cat I could trust, it had to be said. The way he played with dead birds, but that's another story. I felt safe for my friend. And then one day, John Savage said he was going to go to meet him, that he'd invited him for the weekend, and did I know him? Well, I said yes. And John said, I'm off to play golf with him. He plays golf, did you know? Well, I didn't know. I didn't think he was as debauched as that. And I looked at the weather, and I said, there'll be a storm later. And John laughed at me and said, well, that won't get him out of his match. And so I stayed in the house and sketched and thought. I heard Mrs. Savage say that my friend would have to sleep in the tower, the topmost room, for it was the only one that was now free. And when I heard that, I confess, I too had a shiver. When he arrived, I saw him blanch just once as he came through the door, and then he sat and laughed and joked with us. I think I will now take up the tale as he told it to me in the morning, when I drove him away from that house. We hope for the very last time. Yes, I came in and I'd been told you were there. And I said there was going to be a storm. I said that. But John laughed at me and said I was just looking for excuses because I had lost the golf. It's the only honourable thing. Anyway, I had tea with you, as you will remember, and at the end of tea, I and John was alone in the garden. And the dog was there, and you saw him, hackles raise. Yes, staring at the cat. Who is his friend? They were counting for taste. Yes, and the cat looked like it was being stroked. And then at the end, Mrs. Savage herself looked in and said, as I knew she would. I knew she would. For although the party had been good, you saw when I came in I knew this house. And so she looked in and said, we've had to put you in the tower room. John will show you the way. And I looked at my friend John. And as far away from the little rat-like man, John White, you could not believe. Here was a man of bluff honesty and truth. A sound man. And I thought to myself, tonight I break the charm. For I might be sleeping in the house of my nightmares. But my nightmares have flown. And he led me up the chambers, but didn't hold my hand. To the topmost room, saying he was sleeping below, and he hoped I didn't snore. But I don't, as it happens. And he opened the room, and I asked him to hold it open just in case. And I went in. And the room was delightful. 14th century perhaps, but with a modern bed. With all the light coming in from the topmost window. And as I tiptoed up to look through that window, for it was high on the wall, I realised I was looking beyond the wall of the house to that meadow. And for the first time, I felt a real bolt of fear. Not fear like I'd felt before downstairs. This was real fear, because I remembered what it was in this room that I was terrified of. I was terrified of Mrs. White. And I almost stumbled down, and then I turned, and I saw her. Oh, I didn't see her. I saw a painting that was as I remembered her the very last time I had seen her alive. An old grim woman who was standing her portrait was hung at the head of the bed, and at the bottom I could see her son, all weaselly and small, John White, as I had last seen him in my dreams. Older than his mother. So older than his mother's death he appeared. Ugh. It was horrible to see them. So John, who was just about to leave, I called him and I said, can we move that pictures? I can't sleep with those pictures. I really can't. And John came up and looked at them and said, my, they are quite hideous. And we took out the portrait of John White, and he said he'd have it sent downstairs. For John White was a previous owner of this house, and perhaps anyone would want, or perhaps the servants who had been in the house when he had taken it would remember him, and some might want it. But Madam White, the portrait was so horrific, we couldn't imagine anyone would want. And he and I, both strong men, went to the frame and tried to lift it. But it was heavy. It was a dead weight. I tell you, Julius, a dead weight. And we couldn't together lift it. So he called up a footman, and the three of us struggled and struggled, carrying at last the portrait out and putting it face down on the gallery. And then the footman looked at his hand and seemed to run down the stairs. And I looked at my sleeve and my hand, and it was covered in blood, fresh blood, but I had no cut. And I looked then at John, and he was looking at his hand, rubbing it looking for the cut, for his hand and shoulder were full of blood, and both of us shivered. But I think there was some sort of pact between us to try to forget it, or pretend it was a sunset, or an effect of the heavy oppressiveness of the day. For it was true, the storm was brewing. Well, I went back into my room, I dressed for dinner, and I went down. I came back up late. It was about 12, long after you had gone to bed, Julius. I lit myself into my room, you can be sure. I had my torch, and I noticed there was actually electricity in the room, so I touched it on, and I determined to sleep with the light on. That would learn them, I thought. I stretched out in the bed, and it felt so incredibly comfortable. I fell asleep, as if I was happy, as if the dream was broken. Suddenly I woke! I would like to think it was lightning, and I was in the dark. The storm had put out the fuse, at least in this old part of the house. I looked around, wondering what had disturbed me. I looked to the left, and suddenly, by a bolt of lightning, I saw it. I saw it, Julius. The picture was back in the room. Before I could cry, the room had gone dark again. I wondered. I reached for my torch, and I knocked it over. And as I knocked it over and was scrabbling, suddenly there was another bolt of lightning. And I caught from my eye the frame. And it was empty. And then it was dark. And I tried to find my torch, but the batteries had come out of them. I could feel that there was something in the room, but I couldn't see it. I knew it had no power. Until, suddenly, through 4 strikes of lightning struck together, right over our heads they were. And the light seemed to burn. To me it seemed like minutes, but in reality I suspect it was only 10 seconds. And there I swear she was. There I swear she was. Hand I felt on my shoulder, cold, clawing, as if it was old. And the smell! As a body makes when it is too old and rotten. And her teeth were right next to my ear, and I heard her whisper, I knew you would come to feed me, that we may feed together thereafter. I opened my mouth to scream, but as the light burned, I could say nothing. I felt so cold on my shoulder, and then I screamed in the dark. For in the dark she was gone. I screamed and screamed, and I heard a clatter from below me. As I ran out, I bumped into John, and he had a powerful torch with him. I said, look in the room! Look in the room! She's still there! Somewhere. And he turned on his torch and went in. I didn't follow him. I just heard him cry out, did you put her back? How do you move her? I went back in, and there indeed was the portrait, was the figure still in it, with a horrible, malevolent look in its eye. And then John said, the smell! What did you eat? And then suddenly something caught his eye. He shone the torch. You know what we saw, Julius? Yes, you asked me the next morning. It was the kind of shift they bury the dead in. And this had held a figure long dead. for it was old and mildewy, as if the corpse inside had rotten quite away. And John, when he saw it, cried out. We turned and fled, locking the room after us, and we spent the night in his room. And in the morning, the portrait was still there, but it was back to looking more like it had done before. But the funeral sift was also still there. And we took it out the garden, went through the gate, and buried it. And I left with you, and so you did. But as we went, you clutched your shoulder. Yes, for the first time I remembered the hand on it just after I buried the sift. And when I opened up your shoulder to have a look, there were 5 bruises, such that fingers might make. But each bruise was blooded in the end, as if those hands had sucked out the blood. So I took you straight to the best doctor I know, and he said it was remarkable. And your blood pressure showed that you had lost 2 pints. Many more and you would have been dead. I never had the heart to find the story, did you? Yes, of course I did. 10 years ago she had died, Mrs. White, owner of that house, mother of John. They had come up to her as she lay in her bed in that room, and they had found her without any blood in her. None at all, for she had cut her wrist in the night, and all the blood seemed to have flowed out of her body. Now they were Catholics, and there was a to-do about where she would be buried. She was a clear suicide, or so the priest said, and others remembered that she had never been a woman to inspire love. Evil, I heard them describe her. Evil. And so the priest refused to bury her. She had died unrepentant. And the family refused to put her in a public cemetery or burn her. And they'd buried her according to their own designs, right outside the house. And men said that she'd walked, that the blood that had been drained from her was unquiet. And some said that something else had killed her. But I didn't believe that. All I know for certain was that her son John stayed there for a year. And then he disappeared. He was found wandering mad in France. And they said he committed a murder. And he had tried to suck the unfortunate man's blood. Oh, it makes you shiver to think about it. And now we read in the papers that house was burned. A mysterious fire took hold of it, long after John Savage had left it. And now the ghosts, if that was what they are, and their ruins lie together. I am glad to tell you, he never has told me a dream again, good or bad. Perhaps he listens to my counsel now, that the only thing a truly imaginative mind can do with their dreams is to forget them, else they become nightmares.